way our government across administrations have destabilized Central America, South America, interfered in their elections, toppled some Democratic elected leaders and some what we would call dictators, and have created the conditions for all of these folks to either be slaughtered in their own country or come here and then be deported, detained. All of that, I think we just have to own some of this.
The days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land. Not a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. Amos chapter 8, verse 11. You may have noticed a bit of a lag between episodes of this podcast, and if you'll allow, that lag has been rather intentional. See, I've not known what to say, what to add to this shared cultural moment of ours. I didn't honestly know if it was even my place to add or say anything. See, I don't want to just be making noises, even if they're pleasant noises. So I spent some time doing the thing I've learned is key to not only a good or great podcast, but a well-lived life. I listened. My guest on this episode is Michael McBride. And just as he did in season 1 of the At Sea podcast, he offers an invitation, a challenge, and a wisdom that not only clarifies my place in the world around me, but also the path before me through that world as a culture maker. I hope and expect that this conversation may provide that same kind of clarity for you. Check it out. Is there anything you want to cover? Is there anything you feel like, hey, we need to get to this?
I don't have. I mean, I'm sure we'll get to whatever.
Like your book and all that.
My who?
Your book.
I had no book, so don't ask me about no book.
Tell me about your book.
I ain't got no book.
Are you gonna do that at some point?
I may do it this year actually, but
what are you gonna
do? I don't know just yet. But it'll be something probably around conversions.
Really?
Yeah.
Say more.
Like that our lives are about having multiple conversions, moments where
interesting.
We experience radical transformations to both say deeper depths. Higher heights, both with God and with humanity. And what's happening right now is people have stopped being converted, and so,
like regularly.
Mm-hmm. So folks,
you kind of have the one.
You have the one, and then you become,
and then you remain in immaturity.
Yeah, you become it's like Jesus, when he had the transfiguration, and they wanted to build a altar,
yes,
a tabernacle to that place,
that moment,
and Jesus like. No.
Or when he fed the 5,000 and they wanted to make him king by force.
Yeah, it's like, no, I mean, these moments should catalyze something that's actually a next step, not
right.
Not a kind of.
And thinking even more like a continual growth as opposed to a moment. That's
that, and so I'm going to chronicle a lot of my conversion moments and talk about how I'm hoping we can, as a church and a people, become much more serious about conversion. Rather
you know Sarah Miles at all?
Who?
Sarah Miles.
Mm-mm.
She wrote Eat This Bread or Take This Bread. She pastors out in San Francisco, St. Gregory. And she writes this thing about conversions, similar thing, and I'll see. I'll look up the quote, but it ultimately is that as well. Like that, the conversion experience is it's not just replicable, but it's necessarily repeated. Mm-hmm. Like that, if you're not having, she would go so far as to say, and you might even go down the road here. Oh, that's when. Yeah, we'll get into this. But she kind of goes so far as to say, like, if there aren't progressive awakenings. Was there an awakening? Like if you're not awake, if you are not continuing to grow, if there isn't like a continual progression of like the next step, the next, you don't necessarily call it levels, but you don't have a next conversion to stick with the language. Mm-hmm. Was there really a conversion? Like if you're given over to the Spirit and the Spirit moves, if you're not moving, Were you given over to the Spirit?
Well,
because maybe you weren't then.
The scriptures, I'm a biblical. I still love scripture. It says you can quench the Spirit, right? So, I think there are ways for us to quench, silence, resist the Spirit, and in that resistance, continually, I think the Spirit gives you over to a reprobate mind, right? So it just lets you go your own way. And so I just think there's a lot of people who stop being converted and at the Spirit's prompting, and then they just stay in a place of immaturity. And it's like, is their salvation still intact? I'll let God decide that, but I think the manifestation of that is certainly, this brokenness and this kind of Christo-fascism that is run amok, and so
that's part of it for you. Is you're looking around culturally at, and we can start right here to talk about Christo-fascism, and you can break that down a little bit. But you look. Let's start here. When you talk about Christo-fascism, what is? Can you break that down? Tell me what Christo-fascism is and how that ties to like a lack of conversion among people who claim to be part of the faith.
Christo-fascism is certainly attributed to a woman. I think her name was Dorothy Sohle, and she was a German believer, I think, or at least a theologian, who talked about how fundamentalism within Christian faith can easily be coupled with political extremism and create a certain kind of what she would call Christo-fascism, a obsession with power, with a kind of domination and imperialism that is then wrapped in scripture or in biblical language, or even say Christian culture, and that kind of Christo-fascism, I think, is a result of being uninterested, unwilling, or too arrogant to see the Spirit is always blowing in ways that are about liberation of the whole person, the mind, the body, the soul. And when we forget that the Spirit is about liberation, and we start making it about power, exclusion, domination, but we still try to use the words of Scripture, the words of Jesus, to license that, then I think we find ourselves being locked into a certain kind of domination theology that's Christo-fascism.
So, and then functionally, I mean, even the way the word plays out, it's fascism.
It's definitely fascism, yeah.
More so than it is Christian. In other words, it's the Christian part of it is sort of like it's a Chevy. Yeah. It's just a green Chevy.
Yeah, it's definitely, Christo becomes more the adjective than it does the noun, right? And so part of what I think we have to always remember is that the faith handed to us is always the center. It is the foundation. It is the noun. It is the thing. Yeah. And when we relegate that to a country, a culture, a political party, a personal, private, or public interest, then I think we actually create idolatry, a kind of idolatry that always results in the death, the same death that was unleashed upon Jesus by the empire. And so our task, though, is to learn from this history and not continue to fall victim to it. Certainly, we serve a resurrected Christ, so the fearlessness by which we should resist this evil must flow from the truth that Jesus is alive and resurrected. Death never has the final say. And at the same time, we should appreciate that death is still too often a reality being unleashed by people who claim to serve the one who was resurrected. And so we have a lot of work to do. And if we don't do our work, I think we will stop being converted, transformed, changed into the image of Jesus, which then I think would be the ultimate condemnation of our faith.
So since our last podcast conversation, a lot has happened.
It's been a year. How long has it been?
Yeah.
A lot's happened just in the last week.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Where were you on election night?
I was sitting right here in our living room watching the unbelievable happen. I was communicating with a couple of my friends who were actually on the news programs reporting on this stuff, and they were telling me there's no way this is going to happen because they were getting a different set of information. Yeah. But I was just watching these states, go for Trump, and so we're sitting here, me, my wife, my daughters, and it was a surreal experience. I was on my way into a sabbatical, and about 10:30, I realized I wasn't going to go on a sabbatical.
Are you kidding me?
Oh no, yeah, I'm very serious.
You just put that down. You said,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think all of us who have a sense of what oppression and maniacal leadership looks like and the impact of that, I think all was very clear that night it was going to be an all hands on deck moment, and that
you knew that at 10:30.
Oh yeah, when I knew he was going to win,
because that was like an hour after Florida went.
Yeah. I mean, all the states were falling in a certain kind of way, and she was, Hillary Clinton was winning all the vote counts, but electoral vote she wasn't winning, and so for me and us, we knew that this is what was getting ready to happen. That everything Trump said he was going to do, he was going to make an effort to do it. And that meant that me and my family and my children and my girls, our lives were going to be plunged into terror and horror. And so I knew I couldn't go on a sabbatical knowing that my family, my congregation, all the people I work with and for across the country were going to be so vulnerable.
The weeks after? Did you then, like, because it sounds like, I mean, you had a plan to not be here, working.
Right? Well, we had already planned pretty much our next 6 months, and we were gonna. We had been running a lot of races nationally around ending mass incarceration through, electing more progressive prosecutors.
Yeah.
We were doing some ballot initiative work, and we also still had a very strong presence in Washington D.C. and the White House and certain parts of the progressive political leadership in Washington D.C. So we had a plan that for the first 90 days, we're going to be participating in the transition team and make sure that mass incarceration and all of our gun violence work was still going to be a huge part of the next administration. So we had steps.
You had steps to take. It was
going to be on cruise control till I came back off in the summer. Yeah.
And then instead you put your hands back on the wheel.
Yeah, because all of our plans were not only irrelevant, but we had to figure out.
Did it feel that way though? The word irrelevant that's strong.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just think people don't fully grasp it. A lot of us knew what was happening,
like right when it was happening.
Yeah. And what is not a surprise to us. I think we're consistently shocked that the rest of the country is so complicit. Like I'm grieved that evangelical white Christians are so committed to this agenda. I am stunned that so many Republican lawmakers who claim to be patriots are watching this man literally crash the country without at least I thought they would move him on out of here, especially after all the stuff with Russia happened. And so I just think that a lot of us who knew what his intentions were, and knew the disdain he had for non-white people. I just think a lot of us knew what was possible. I just think I'm just stunned and grieved that so many other white folks just don't take this threat very seriously. And I think it's literally going to be the reason why the country won't survive
long term.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it's a wrap.
Tell me about that.
Well, all empires fall. All empires fall. Countries are temporary. We're living through. I think the best days of this country are behind it. And I think you just watching what he's doing, I'm not a patriot. Like I'm not someone who pledges allegiance to the United States. I follow Jesus, and Jesus loves the world, Yeah. I mean, that's the song we sing in Sunday school, right?
Mm-hmm. it was some stuff we learned kind of early. We keep going back to this.
Yeah, so this idea that I care about the United States because its impact in Africa and South America and the globalization of our leadership and reach. Impact so many people. So if America is more just, then the world will be more just and more.
So your love for, and we're going to come back to this when we talk about patriotism, but like your love for concern for America is more so predicated on America's impact on the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
Than and we're going to get and talk about the word patriotism in a minute, but like it's not like you love America for America's sake.
Why would I love America for America's sake when America has literally brutalized my ancestors and my family to this day?
Yeah.
I mean, there's not been one day in the history of this country where dark-skinned bodies have been subjected to arbitrary violence at the hands of the United States government. Not one day. Why would I love America when America does not love me? And so I remember talking to Hillary Belafonte, a civil rights legend, who said that he did not leave America because the blood of his friends were still here in the soil.
Because he could.
Oh yeah, Hillary Belafonte is from the Caribbean, so he definitely could have left, but he said Martin King's blood is in the soil. Medgar Evers' blood is still here in the soil. Rosa Parks' blood is still here, and these are people that he grew up with who were resisting this oppression, this violence. He was a very privileged person, so he could live anywhere, literally in the world. And so I've been very challenged. I remember I went to South Africa, and that was my first time on the continent. I was in Pretoria, one of the outskirts of Pretoria. And, I was just so glad to be in Africa. And I was like, I think I'll move here to Africa. One of the South African brothers told me, he said, you're in the belly of the beast of America. We don't need you here. We need you there, because you being there will actually make our life better here. Kind of shot my whole, I want to move to Africa down. But I will move to Africa one day for sure.
Really?
Oh heck yeah, man! This country's not gonna.
That's when you're done.
Oh yeah. This country's not gonna have my blood, man. Yeah, I'm a live on the continent or somewhere else eventually.
So we've touched on a couple of things. I was going to do this a little bit later, but we'll do it now. We touched on words like patriotism. We talked about words like the word privilege. What I want to do is like we did last time, like I do with a lot of our guests, is sort of a practice of lexicon. That you come with a body of knowledge attached to particular words that might be heard or understood differently depending on who you're talking to. And so I'm going to feed you a word and just want you to vamp on it a little bit.
Okay.
Like what comes out of you when this lands in your head.
Gotcha.
So let's start with the word patriotism. I say patriotism. What happens in your mind?
Well, patriotism, I think of the flag. I think of people kneeling. I think of people upset with Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed. I think of Donald Trump weaponizing the national anthem and rich white billionaires caving to keep young people, young men from having a living. So patriotism to me is, when unchecked, idolatry that leads to the oppression and death of people who are not white. Patriotism, when put under the say influence or authority of our faith, of Christian faith, lived well, I think is about stewardship of our resources, of our power, in ways that actually make the world a place that is similar to, say, what it was in the garden, where there was enough for everyone and there was no lack. So I want to imagine patriotism as a form of stewardship when when lived under the principles of Jesus and the Scripture, rather than this blind loyalty to an empire that literally has a military footprint all over the world.
Can you talk about white privilege? It's a phrase that, and the reason I'm bringing it to you is it seems like a phrase that should be at this point understood, and yet isn't.
Yeah. So white privilege is simply a set of benefits that people who appear to be white accrue without any effort or without any effort. It does not. White privilege is not saying that white people don't work, that white people are lazy, that white people don't have struggles. It's just saying that there are certain privileges that white people have that other people don't get to participate in if they don't pass as white. The best way I explain it, I have TSA pre, and I can be on a bus with a bunch of people, and we will get to the airport. All of us have to get off that bus. All of us have to carry our own luggage. But with my TSA pre, I get to move to the front of the line, while those who don't have TSA pre have to stand in line. It doesn't preclude that we all had to pack our clothes, get on a bus, carry our luggage, and walk to the gate. It just means that I get to pass a bunch of people in line. That's what white privilege is. White privilege is the TSA pre-approval.
Why do you think that's such a difficult concept or reality to grasp? Because there's like a holdout among a lot of white sisters and brothers who don't not only don't get it, but they don't want to get it. There's a resistance to the idea. Like, why is that difficult to grasp?
Well, I think it's difficult to grasp for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think sometimes the way white privilege is talked about may communicate, or people may hear it as saying that white people don't have to struggle or didn't have to, work for everything they had. So I just think people misunderstand it. I think some people are just uninterested in hearing about how human hierarchy actually benefits them, even if they are still struggling, right? So it's like, I don't see that I have white privilege because I'm still broke. I'm losing my house. My kids don't have health insurance, so they can still point to concrete ways that they're struggling. And they've always been taught that the reason why black folks or brown folks or non-white folks have struggled is because of some deficiency in them. Now, particularly progressive white folks would never say that publicly because, you're just too nice and kind. But, all of us know that we have these conversations growing up around like who deserves and who not to be like. And you look at news, reports, and just like, why don't those people just, you just grew up hearing it. And so mind science, there's all kind of mind science and evidence that actually shows how your brain and all this stuff, it processes this and it creates these opinions and thoughts. And the system and the society is structured to benefit white skin. And so this is, I think, a hard truth for folks because, again, people have been fed a myth of American exceptionalism. Most people don't know history. I was talking with someone who worked in the Obama White House a couple weeks ago. We were all at a birthday party together for a friend of ours, and he was just saying how bad it is now, and of course it's terrible. And then we started talking about the White House years with the Obama administration, and he was very much just saying how this stuff was not present then. And I just reminded him that the Obama administration dropped hundreds of thousands of bombs on poor folk in Africa, on the continent. The drone wars during this previous administration was quite terrible. Then I started just unpack, that black folks' experience in this country has just been terrible across every administration for the last several hundred years. And he just was not even aware of much of what I was saying. And so there's, I think, a certain just kind of naivete or ignorance that exists in the hearts, minds of a lot of folks.
And
they just don't know history.
And in his case, to some degree, because he was aligned, when you talk about patriotism, he was aligned to a certain brand of patriotism, which was more of a left-leaning patriotism.
But I think it's all idolatry. If you can take the life of another human being just because they don't identify with whatever label you have, that's evil. I just don't know any other way to say it. It's evil. Like, the way our government across administrations have destabilized Central America, South America, interfered in their elections, toppled some Democratic elected leaders and some what we would call dictators, and have created the conditions for all of these folks to either be slaughtered in their own country or come here and then be deported, detained. All of that, I think we just have to own some of this. It does not, resolve or, let other countries off the hook for their own kind of, foibles and systemic and structural evils. But to imagine that the United States is without any sin or error in the way in which we, as the biggest military power, and everyone who's alive, lifetime, the United States has been the biggest global military empire. If you are alive today, you've never not been alive when the United States was not the greatest military force in the world. And to believe that we've not wielded that force without error or harm, to me, is a delusion, and it is idolatry.
There's that West Wing moment when there's a conversation about nuclear weapons and who gets to use and who doesn't. And I think it was the Pakistani the prime minister who says, or who says something along the lines of like, it's difficult for the world to listen to the only nation
that's right
that's ever used nuclear weaponry to kill people.
That's right.
Then preach about the evils without the regret that should come with like, that shouldn't have happened, because there's still the justification.
That's right.
It's like, well, yeah, I mean, but had we not killed that many people with a nuclear weapon, then lots of other people would have died in other ways. There's the justification of it. That, yeah, we live in the most powerful military empire in human history, but we paint that in a positive light. That's a good thing, because America by nature is good for the world.
Well, I think that America is an empire, and so God never stands on the side of empires. Anywhere in Scripture, God stands against empires, and so I think we all have to shudder. We should shudder. We should be very afraid that we have so much trust in horses and chariots rather than God. I think that for many of us, again, who've lived through the worst underbelly of our country, we have this, I think, dissonance around we fight, we participate, we're in the military because we do feel an allegiance to this country only if it is to help make our own lives better and less terrifying. But I think as the church, all of us have to be much more honest about what does it mean for the kingdom of God to be on earth as it is in heaven. Is God preferring America over Somalia? Does God prefer England over Colombia?
And can we buy the idea that having that mindset, that the default mindset as an American, that God does prefer America?
It's heresy.
It's heresy to begin with, but it's also blinding.
It's very blinding. And
it's
particularly
it blinds me from self-examination. I don't think about our actions. I don't think about American foreign policy. In a more critical way, unless, and we'll come back to this in a minute, unless it's and I get this as someone who has leaned left most of his life. Like, if it's the Bush administration and it's the Gulf War, I'm in the street, which I was. But then, like,
if it's Obama and the drone wars,
like, I had a harder time coming around to, like, because the thing I was still sort of bound to was the general goodness of America, and then there's the exception of the right-leaning military mindedness.
Right.
When that's not really the fundamental reality of things. The fundamental reality of things is that this is an empire, and that God doesn't side with empire, and that the power that comes along with empirical rule is almost exclusively over the course of history abused to oppress and injure.
Absolutely. And so I think the role of the church within empire is to be the prophet, to be the conscience, to always call the country back to right relationship, repentance, but more faithful stewardship. It is not to help make theological sense of mass murder. And so I think we've lost a lot, man. And it's not, I mean, it's pronounced under certain, to your point, it's more pronounced under certain regimes than others. I mean, I think, it would be, kind of irresponsible or, somewhat, a thin analysis to suggest that all presidents and administrations and political kind of philosophies are equal when we think of the kind of loss of life and oppression of people that results from said policies. But I think it's important to just be truthful that empires rarely are liberating. They depend on power. They depend on violence to help solidify power. They depend on death or the fear of death to maintain order. And that is an antithesis to the message of Jesus.
Can you talk then about church? Another lexicon item here. When I say the word church, like talk about church.
Well, church is in trouble. When you say the word church, I think the church in America is in trouble. And I think that the church in America today has divided loyalties, a divided mind, a divided soul. I think the church in America is much more fear-driven than love-driven, much more power-driven than sacrificial-driven, much more white-centered than Jesus-centered. And so I think the church in America is in trouble, a lot of trouble. And
is there a divergence then between the word church and the next word on the lexicon list, which is Christian? When I say the word Christian, what rings in your mind?
Yeah, I think Christians in trouble too. I mean,
is that a different trouble?
Yeah, I think Christian seems to be over associated with whiteness and with these notions of power and narrow notions of sin that are usually about sexual behaviors rather than relationships to others. It's a very individualistic kind of word perceived. I want to believe that Christians are needing a revival of sorts, a revival of our faith, of our theology, of our practice that will look strange to all of us and even to the world. I think right now people say Christian and they just have certain associations that aren't identified with Jesus. And that I think is a problem. That's where a revival I think is necessary. And
you think the revival should look strange?
Oh yeah, I think a revival should look very strange. Like the day of Pentecost, I'm a Pentecostal. So the day of Pentecost, they blamed it on the wine. Alcohol, right? It was kind of like, these guys are drunk in the middle of the day. They couldn't associate what was happening.
Yeah.
It was a radical interruption. Jesus dying on the cross. That was not associated with the religious mores of the Jewish culture. Now, this idea of a God man dying was consistent in other religious traditions, but in Jewish context, people just didn't have a sense. It just looked strange. Like the cross was a cursed object, and so how can redemption come through the curse? I mean, so I think we have to pray and ask God for a revival, and I hope the revival dismantles this structural oppression that, again, I think is ripping the world apart.
When the last time we actually spent some time in the same room, you had Dominic Gillard at the Way.
Dom, man, Rethinking Incarceration. Y'all get that book if you ain't got it.
Such a good book. Yeah. So we had Dom on. I came out to listen to the interview, and then I had him on the podcast the next night. Mm-hmm. And there were a few really great questions from the floor that night during the conversation for Dominic, and the one was it was in his book kind of angles this direction. He's really clear about his critique of Christian America, and insofar as it's the primary difference between what he's doing with his book and things that you might see with like Brian Stevenson or someone else. That is like, hey, let's look at the complicity of and the problem with the church in relationship to this, into mass incarceration. And the question from the floor was about the back half of that, which is for Dominique. There's hope to be found and expected from within the church, specifically in relationship to mass incarceration. The question from the floor was like, you keep talking about the church as this potential or possible or inevitable even source of hope and redemption, but as an outsider, I look at Christian America and think you're right smack. You're the problem. Like your complicity. It's not even complicity, but you're a driving force behind this. And what do you have to say about that? And Dominique had some things to say about people changing their minds. But do you continue to have hope that like the church is, or church can be, church people can be, are like, is that a place for folks to look for hope?
Well, if Jesus had not told Peter that the gates of hell would not prevail against his church, I'd be worried. So I have faith in what Jesus said. I don't have faith in
what you see,
in what I see. And that's fine. I mean, faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things not seen. Black people, descendants of African slaves who are Christian, who were Christian before they came to the United States in chains, have always had a sense of awe and surprise that God could make a way out of no way. We sing a song, I'm looking for a miracle. I expect the impossible. The sky is the limit to what I can have. Just believe and receive it. God will perform it today. So I as a good Pentecostal, I always believe that God can just do it. The scripture says in the last day, God's going to pour out His Spirit on all flesh, and sons and daughters will prophesy, and old men will see dreams, young men will see visions. Even on my handmaid and servants will I pour out my Spirit, and everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. I go back to the passage of scripture that continue to push me towards this breaking open of God's promise. And so I don't lose hope in the church, because Jesus has told us that the church will always bounce back. But I don't think people who think they are a part of the church are very faithful. And I think that they are living a very reprobate and blasphemous faith that I hope that they'll wake up.
So you resonate with the critique of folks living outside of church.
How could you not? And it's not just the Christian church. I mean, if we just think of the ways in which our society disdains poor people, feeds, death in all these different kinds of ways. And religious folk don't seem to have a response that is over associated with life. I think we all have to ask a lot of questions about the role of and the practice of our religions. And so, I think Christian faith, man, is, Jesus is not the problem in Christian faith. So-called followers of Jesus are the problem. And so I think that the church has to do a better job with discipleship and disciple people to the ways of Jesus and not to the ways of Western, European, American, cultural, economic values. I think we have to really recapture Jesus and figure out what does it mean to struggle to live Jesus' life out faithfully, and it's a challenge for sure. It's not an easy thing, but we have to live into that. I certainly believe.
Mm-hmm. A few weeks ago, I did an interview I'm editing down now with a guy who lives in Vallejo, who he's had a weed dispensary there for years and years and years and years. And a lot of our conversation was around his life and his journey and his relationship with the law. And there's a difference, it seems to me, when we talk about the legalization of drugs and it's whether it's marijuana or anything else. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between the black experience of drug culture and the broader white experience of drug culture. Mm-hmm. What is the conversation about the legalization of drugs sound like?
Yeah.
Like among people in a black church congregation, among people in black neighborhoods.
I think most people who are steeped in black church, say, sensibilities, culture, are probably anti-legalization because there's been a kind of moral or sin attachment to drug use and drug culture. But I think on a practical level, people are curious about it because of the way in which it has literally decimated the black community through incarceration, through criminalization, through policing, etc. And
this ends up being part of the primary difference is that for white culture, when we talk about the devastating effect of drugs and drug use, we talk about like kids dropping out of school. It's moral, it's personal. It's like, he was such a bright young man and then this and that and the other. Whereas for black culture, it's not just that, although those things are still true, but you add on to that the layer of
racism
with regards to the way the drug laws are implemented in black neighborhoods.
It's a collective punishment frame, collective punishment.
Say more.
Meaning that, the error of one person in the community requires the whole community to be collectively punished for it. Right? And so if one person is dealing drugs, then in order to catch that one person, I'm going to have to literally terrorize the whole neighborhood. Everybody has to pay for the sin of that one person. And no one, like Khalil Gibran Muhammad writes a powerful book everyone should read called The Condemnation of Blackness. And he just talks about how, criminology, sociology in the 1930s and 40s, when they were building out this kind of methodology around policing and public safety, they over associated blackness with criminality. And so even things like standing outside on the street corner became known as loitering and became a criminal offense. And that became over associated with black bodies and dark bodies, and they created a whole criminal code to criminalize black bodies. And so Nixon, and his whole team and staff, you can Google all this is all public information now, talked about the war on drugs being used as a way to punish, oppress, and neutralize the black liberation movement and the Vietnam War movement. And he said we need to figure out a way to neutralize these people without appearing to the everyday American.
Which became the war on drugs.
And so, the way in which, crack and which, a lot of folks feel like was very much sponsored by the American government to flood black communities. Heroin was always a huge challenge for people that came home from Vietnam War. My father's a Vietnam War veteran. And so he and others who came home, I mean, just think about the hundreds of thousands of folks who came home from war hooked on heroin. I mean, you know, and there was never a public health response to it, right? It was always this kind of sense that
it was a criminal. It was a problem of law and obedience.
Law, obedience, and order, not healing and health. And so I think Black church folks are wrestling with how do we actually eschew the kind of moralizing of drug use and actually talk about healing. Why are people self-medicating with drugs? What's the underlying issue there? How can we heal the soul and the body and the mind and the spirit of folk rather than put them in cages, right? I mean, we're talking about the stuff happening at the border, but we have Black bodies in cages all across this country, and their heart and their spirit is being broken. More broken than it was when they got there. And a lot of folks are there because of drugs. They're not there because of the kind of crimes or against human bodies necessarily. There because they possessed marijuana. They were selling marijuana, or they were selling crack, or they were selling cocaine. But again,
the moralizing around drugs is another, which it's not necessarily a bad thing per se. It's just it's not really well investigated. It's just sort of like it's just a blanket, drugs bad. You do them, you're bad. And that tends to be propelled again from
used. So it's again like it's not to this extent, but it's the fusion of say of your personal moral convictions with a freight train criminalizing engine, right? And so when you marry those two, it's almost like you're marrying fascism with Christian faith, right? You create a whole other monster.
And we come back to Christian fascism.
Yeah, it's not intended to really address the core root.
Because you're not trying to love people.
No, you're not trying to love. You're not trying to help them. You're actually trying to protect yourself from them,
from the bad guys.
And the reality is when Jesus was asked, when the young man came and called Jesus good, Jesus said, "Why you call me good? It's doing good." But Father Jesus, I think, was trying to erase this good bad distinction, right? And saying, what does it mean for you to see me not as someone separate from you, right? But that we are all, in this work, in this life together. And so I advocate for the decriminalization of drugs for sure, because I think as a drug and alcohol counselor, I have a degree in drug and alcohol counseling. I think you get better outcomes when you have public health responses. I don't know anyone who is a drug addict that stops using drugs or selling drugs because they go to jail. I mean, it's just not. It's not
a sufficient deterrent. No. If that's the deterrent, if that's the fix,
if we're trying to stop a problem, you don't stop a problem with more violence,
right?
Unless you're America,
and then you just keep trying.
And profiting off of it for sure.
You gonna watch football this year?
Probably not. I'm a huge 49er fan. I grew up here in Hunters Point, San Francisco. So, I grew up with Joe Montana and all that stuff. I was at NFC Championship games when Harbaugh and them were winning. So I was happy about Jimmy G. But the way they treat Colin Kaepernick and Eric Reed in the NFL, I just think is unconscionable. And so I'm not going to watch much at all. I won't lie and say I won't sneak a peek here and there, but I'm not going to be following the NFL.
Because you love the game.
I love watching it. I mean, I very, very much enjoy the game, but, the way in which the players get treated in the NFL is just, it's
even beyond Kaepernick and Reed.
Well, I think Kaepernick and Reed certainly is the catalyst for me not watching now.
Yes.
I mean, I was growing more sensitive to like all the domestic violence problems happening in the league. I work with a lot of women who are survivors of domestic violence. And so it just was invisible to me until, Ferguson happened and the voice of women is just so much more prominent around the pain they endure. And so to just see the way domestic violence was treated in the NFL was starting to be like, man,
maybe this isn't such a healthy culture.
It's not a healthy culture. And then now you're seeing all these head injuries and people are dying. I mean, it's the whole thing. It just feels. Yeah. Have you seen Django?
Oh yeah.
You remember that scene where them two black guys are just beating each other to a pulp in front of the white master? Like that's what it
feels like.
That's the image of the NFL I have right now. It's just like guys beating themselves to a pulp. Now, there's a beauty to the game, right? Like in the same way there's a beauty to boxing. Yeah, up to a point. You like guys' ears are hanging off their face, and you're just like woo. Yeah, or you just watch somebody get punched and their eyeball pop. You're just like, oh man. And so the way that Colin and Eric Reed are being treated, to me, is equivalent to eyes being popped out of people's heads.
And it kind of highlights and exposes the rest of it. I mean, the general treatment of it as the culturally, and I ask you because I've come to the end of the line for me in the NFL as a lifelong Raider fan, and
how can you keep rooting for the Raiders, man? I mean, they figure out ways to screw the fans.
Well, that was the thing. And on like for me, it was like
it's like they don't even try to there wasn't to the Oakland fans.
The opportunity they had, and it was the exploitative nature of the NFL as a culture.
Yeah,
that's finally what I was able to pin down. Like this is actually what's really bothering me.
Yeah,
because it's the treatment of Kaepernick and Reed. It's the blind eye to head injury. Mm-hmm. It's the blind eye to a culture that doesn't just hide, but almost comes damn close to celebrating. Well, it does celebrate violence.
Absolutely.
And so why not be okay with violence against women in your households, etc. And then the exploitative nature of teams and owners in relationship to cities.
Yeah,
and the opportunity that the Raiders had to do something in Oakland.
Yeah.
That needs help.
Help.
How much help would it be?
Yeah. And you're a billionaire, and
you're gonna be fine. Yeah. It's just how fine are you gonna be? Yeah. And the decision to leave and go to the worst city in America.
Yeah.
You're gonna go to Vegas. Yeah. Which is like hey, here's where exploitation is the norm. Is Vegas, and it solidified the thing for me. Like I can't do that anymore.
Yeah,
I can't participate.
Again, I think the NFL is gonna is gonna have a lot of problems in the future. I mean. I think that I don't think it's gonna be able to last in its current state or form. Now, it just may be a microcosm of the country, though. I mean, this kind of exploitive, capitalistic, bottom line, money, violent culture. I mean, how can anything sustain itself in perpetuity with those core principles? I mean, unless the world is not what we believe God says it was created for. We're working through these passages, Romans chapter 8, about all of creation is groaning and looking and hoping for the manifestation of God and God's people, and unless creation is not groaning and hoping and waiting with expectancy, and this is really the way the world is, then the world will not continue to be here too much longer, because we are watching it unravel in a lot of different places. That's so interesting. I was reading an article that actually said that the many of the metrics of life expectancy, diseases, like the world has never been in a better place. People are living longer. People have less diseases. Poverty is not nearly as so I was fascinated reading this, and I just was saying to myself, man, am I just kind of clicking myself through Facebook and news media into a abyss of despair and hopelessness? And so
.com, clicking myself into an abyss of despair and hopelessness.com.
Yeah. And so I'm going to be reflecting a little bit on this, right? This idea that is the world actually getting better, and we are just living in some of the worst, most base expressions of excessiveness, because I went to Morocco this summer or earlier this year, and I was driving through the countryside. I was lost for like 2-3 hours. My GPS didn't work right, so I thought I was driving somewhere. I was lost. I was actually scared for about an hour because I was thinking, man, I'm gonna die out here in the middle of Morocco mountains. But I'm driving through these very towns, and you just see people just living real basic lives, you know. And to me, you know, I feel like, man, you guys are out here in the stone ages, but you saw kids playing, and you know, they walking with their goats, and it just, you know, I just wonder, well, would life be better if I wasn't surrounded by so much excess? And maybe the rest of the world that doesn't have excess is actually, you know, living with necessities. Like if we can, you know, make sure that the flu doesn't kill you, right? You know, cancer, or, you know, like, you know, you can live to be 60, 70, 80 and you have food and shelter, and, you know, not like a Mercedes and a 10-bedroom house, and, you know, everybody wants a lot. So I don't know, bro. I feel like I'm rambling now, but I do think that there's a certain kind of I think there's a certain kind of reality that we just have to know that these inequities, both in power, resources, etc., are unsustainable. And so if we want the world to be its best, then we should get back to a space where you know, God looked at creation and said it was good. Why? Because everybody had enough.
Well, let's wrap it up like this then. Where are you seeing that? Like, where are you seeing redemption, change? Where are you seeing goodness, truth, and beauty?
That's a good question. So I see it in small spaces. You know, Sally McFay calls them wild spaces, you know, in the margins. I see it in music, you know, like really where art and beauty is able to be to break through out of the mundane.
Is there specific music you're saying?
You know, I'm intrigued by the like Janelle Monáe's, you know, like this space where you just find beauty, you know, breaking through. I like PJ Morton, you know, I'm a huge Warren Campbell fan. You know, always love listening to some oldies, you know, the Stevie Wonders. You know, I think, you know, I love black church music. I feel like there's an extemporaneous nature of it where you just feel the spirit, like just, you know, just flowing in ways you like, wow, that was a surprise.
Yeah. And are there contemporary movements in music and culture and politics? Are there people doing things that you're pointing out and saying there's life breaking through?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the movement that came post Ferguson is, to me, very promising. You know, places where people can gather across difference is, I think, always a place where conversion happens. You know, Ferguson forced me to come to grips with my own homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, kind of arrogance around, you know, Christian exceptionalism. And I think I'm the better for it. You know, I still have certain core beliefs that I think are grounding me, but I think I've had to look into the eyes of other hurting people and see beyond what I've been told about them. And I think, you know, Ferguson, unfortunately, the blood of Michael Brown and the resistance of that community who are still being punished for their resistance is still a deep pain in my soul. But I do feel like all this resistance is very hopeful. I've been heartened by the way folks responded to the Muslim ban, or the way folks responded to the children being separated. I think I'm finding most hope through the kind of the intersectional spaces of resistance. And so I do believe we're going to win. I don't think, you know, whiteness and white evangelicalism and American imperialism and Christo-fascism is going to be able to defeat the power of God's people. I think these are all idols. They don't have eyes. They don't have arms. They don't have feet. And so they can't see, they can't hear, and they can't touch. And that's why we're going to win. We just got to catch up to the victory that's ahead of us, right? And so I'm excited to be a part of that. My church brings me a lot of hope. You know, we have a very vibrant congregation. Most of the folks there are Christian. I think a small number of folks are folks committed to justice, and they just love to be around the work we're doing. I think we have a number of seekers, people who are genuinely agnostic or atheists who are looking for hope. We got, gay folk, straight folk, our political diversity is maybe not that, much of a spectrum. Although we've had some folks there, since the election of Trump who feel challenged, because I think they acknowledge that their affinity to a Republican or right-leaning political ideology for reasons like abortion or gay marriage or, free market are very much challenged when, the only way to get that is to totally
it costs
destroy.
So much.
Yeah, it's just
how much do you really care about the thing you actually?
So I'm real curious. With this whole Supreme Court fiasco that's happened, I'm curious about how white evangelicals, if they're able to get someone on the court that will overturn Roe versus Wade and take the abortion card off the table. I'm curious to see, will white evangelicals who claim to love Jesus and feel like abortion is the only reason they vote Republican, I'm curious to see, will they move to a more centrist justice frame, or will you just find another reason to be anti everybody who's not white? And I feel like I know the answer, but I think the soul of evangelicalism is rotten to its core, and I think Black church. The soul of Black church is at a crossroads. I think we have to answer a lot of questions about, will we recover our prophetic voice and really be the moral compass of this country? I mean, I think people forget that if it weren't for the Black church's moral compass, this country probably would not have come out of the places of slavery and Jim Crow and racial hierarchy. We have a way to go on gender, and there's certainly a way to go, I think, on sexual orientation, some of these other, kind of hierarchies. But we all got a lot of work to do, and I think we all do the work where God has placed us, and we try to be more faithful. Perfection is not the goal, faithfulness is.
That's good.
Yeah.
Man, thank you for your time.
Hey, always great to be with you, J Money.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the At Sea Podcast. This is normally where I would say something along the lines of visit us at the website and go to iTunes and let people know you like it. But this time, here's what I'm asking you to do. If you are not registered to vote, please go register to vote. Until next time.